Hi, I'm Firewalker, and my very first video I shared on YouTube, I stated that I've grown up in a private Christian education my entire life, from preschool all the way through college. And so one of my viewers asked me to share or discuss some of the pros and cons of growing up having a private religious education. And I want to divide this discussion up into two different sections, one being religious education and the other being private education, because while all religious education must be private, not all private education must be religious, and there are some things I feel are exclusive to one set versus the other that I want to look at. And as we go into discussing religious education, I wanted to first look at a clip from The Friendly Atheist via The Atheist Voice. Unfortunately, for time's sake, I can't share the entire video. I'm just sharing the first bit of it, but of course the link to the full video is in the description below, as is the link to a related video also from The Friendly Atheist that I feel is relevant to this discussion. Here I want to look at what he has to say about guarding your kids from religion and whether that's a good thing to do. And I think it's important to understand going forward that just because education is religious doesn't mean it's inherently bad. It may not be the best choice for yourself or your kids or whomever, but it's not inherently bad simply because it's religious. There are some pros to that. So I want to take a look at what he has to say right here.
Should we actively guard young children against religion? The idea behind this question is that if you are an atheist parent and you don't believe in God at all, and maybe you even think religion as a whole is not just wrong, it's bad, should you guard your children against it? Should you prevent them from getting exposed to religion, as if that were even possible? And I think the answer to that is a very clear no. Not that I don't even know that you can, but you shouldn't even try to guard your children against religion. In the world that they are going to grow up in, they are going to meet people who hold religious beliefs. And I think it is more important that they not only are exposed to those beliefs, but that they understand why people believe those things. It would be crazy for me as a parent to tell my child, you're not going to believe in God because I don't believe in God. I mean, that's the sort of thing a lot of our parents did to us. You know, we believe in God, and we're going to teach you to believe in God. And I would imagine a lot of you watching who grew out of all that, maybe you don't have resentment against your parents against it, but why would you want to do the same thing to your kids, even with atheism?
I really want us to keep his point in mind as we move forward and look at a couple of the good things that can come out of having a religious education. I have found two pros to having religious education. Again, this is religious, not private education, just strictly the religious portion of it. The first one is that kids are exposed to ideas of morality. Of course, it can be extremely well argued that Christian education specifically may not be the best to discuss morality, considering the stories in the Old Testament and some in the New Testament as well. However, it can be a really good way to open up a dialogue with your kids about right and wrong, morality, treating others as you wish to be treated, etc. And you can teach them how to ask the questions that maybe they wouldn't be taught otherwise. Of course, it's how you are involved with your kids' education that makes the most difference. Is religious education the only way to expose kids to ideas of morality? Absolutely not. You can do that at any point in time, and probably they'll already have come across it through your own parenting before they even get into school. Like I said, just one of the pros. The second pro that I thought might be attributed to religious education is that kids can be exposed to religion and may be able to make a more informed choice for themselves. Because at no point do I ever want somebody to believe something simply because I told them to. It is perfectly normal, logical, reasonable, acceptable for two people of equal education and intelligence to logically come to separate conclusions after looking at the same evidence. That's something that happens, and I never want there to be a fine print. There should never be a fine print under think for yourself of as long as you think like me or as long as you come to my conclusions. That's what my parents did to me. That's what I never want to do to my kids. If someday when I have kids, if I have kids, If they decide they are religious or want to be Christians or Buddhist, Muslim, anything at all, Church of Brian, if you are a Monty Python fan, I don't really care. As long as they look at the evidence for themselves and come to their own conclusion, they have a well-informed decision, even if it's a decision that I disagree with, that is theirs to make, and I respect that. And I want them to make an informed decision, not just to think like me. And again, is religious education the only way for kids to be exposed to religion and to make an informed decision? Absolutely not. In fact, an independent study performed by the Pew Forum on Religion and Public Life found that Christians in the U.S. actually know less about religion than atheists and agnostics, among others, according to this survey that they did. And you can take this quiz online and see how you fare. The link to the articles shown here is found down below. So clearly, religious education may not be the best way to introduce kids to world religions. Of course, I don't know how many or how much, whether somebody had a private education, private religious education, or a public education, affected the answers in this study. I can tell you though that I had a private religious education and I did score pretty well on the quiz. I think on one of the shortened versions of the quiz I got like 8 out of 10. When in high school I took it, I think I got 9 out of 10 or something like that. So take that as you will. At least one of the links in the description will allow you to take the quiz for yourself and see how you do as well. We've already discussed some of the cons of religious education in that it may not be the best to introduce kids to ideas of morality, and it may not be the best to introduce kids to religion either, so that way they can make an informed decision. And what everyone normally thinks of as a con to religious education is that it can be somewhat brainwashy. In elementary, middle, high school, I had chapel 1 day a week, a Bible class every day of the week, the weekdays, then church on Sunday, and then if I did any youth groups or Bible studies on top of that would add to it as well. So I ended up spending a lot of time studying Christianity and the Bible. So didn't really get a whole lot of chances to go out and explore other things. And that's where Christianity starts getting accused of brainwashing. So there's that. It can be kind of brainwashy. College was a different experience though, because although I did have to go to chapel once a week, not that I necessarily did, but we were supposed to, and it was actually required. There were some ways to get around that. But I didn't have to go to church or anything like that, and we did have some required Bible courses as well, but it's a little bit different on the collegiate level versus in high school and below. Nonetheless, it can seem a lot like it's trying to brainwash you. And also, even if you do believe in religion or Christianity, or you are religious, it still may not be the best, because I think that the reason everything Christian-ish sounds so cliche to me is because of how much I heard it. Even by the usual Bible stories they tell kids. By the time I was in high school, it's like, I cannot listen to the story of Moses one more time, or I am going to freaking lose it. Because I just heard it so much. It had no more meaning left to me, because it just got beaten over the head with it so much that there was just really nothing left to it. And I don't think that it made it impossible almost for me to have a real experience with Christianity, because everything was just so cliche by the time I really got around to being able to think about it. And so there are some basic cons to having religious education, and next we'll talk about having a private education and some of the pros and cons of that, because like I said, just because it's private does not necessarily mean that it's religious. In my experience and in my opinion, private schools tend to have a higher level of education Simply because they have smaller class sizes, so they get more one-on-one attention, can make that a little bit easier, a little bit better environment for learning, and they're not held to things like No Child Left Behind or this new Common Core curriculum that has everybody so up in arms. So they get to set the standard for themselves, and they can set it higher. Doesn't mean necessarily always do, because again, it's up to them. It's highly unregulated as part of being a private school, and especially when it comes to private religious schools, you never really know. It's on a school by school basis. So even though the school that I went to had a very high level of education, doesn't mean that they all will, which is of course also one of the cons, is that there's not a whole lot of regulation that goes into that. You aren't going to know for sure based on laws what kind of education kids will get there. That's going to be case by case basis, and it's going to be how much you're involved in it and how much you look into it, really. And the other con that I really noticed is that it does have fewer people. It's nice, smaller classes, easier time learning, but at the same time, if you don't fit in, I think it's harder for you to find a group to fit into. There's just less people. And of course, the obvious is that private schools are more expensive than public schools. It can contribute a lot into why a family would choose a public school, private school, or religious private school. That's definitely something that has an effect on it as well. So to wrap up the pros and cons segment of the analysis before I share some of my own personal experiences, basically religious education, more cons than pros. Private education sounds like a pretty good deal, though, if that's something that you can do. That's something I'm a fan of. But religious education doesn't really seem to be worth it. Honestly, just dialogue with your kids seems like a much more effective way to handle things. As for my own personal experience, it is important to note that I did get some very unique experiences because I was at the schools that I was, including student leadership unique opportunities to learn there in Europe, DC, Orlando, Florida. It was a really cool experience. A lot of focus on networking at the school that I was at, so able to make some friends in, I guess, high-ish places, somewhat influential places, and that's pretty useful. I got a lot more of that in college as well. And like I said, it was a small class environment that was great for learning. Did get quality education, but there was definitely some misinformation in there. I was really under the impression that Christianity had a lot more answers than they apparently do. And we were encouraged to question. We actually had an apologetics class. We had rhetoric, the whole shebang. So we weren't told not to question, just that we were under the impression that they had the answers to our questions. And that's something that I've learned as I've moved on from that, is that they don't. Or the answers that I thought were sufficient actually weren't and needed to be looked into a little bit more. And that eventually leads you to the first video that I posted, Free and Honest Search for Truth, Why I Left Christianity. And so that's definitely a downside, having religious educations. I questioned, but I thought they had the answers and they didn't. I also need to point out that my high school and before experience is completely different than my college experience at Christian schools. High school, I actually no longer talk to anybody from there. If I'm home visiting and I see somebody I knew from high school or from that school, I will turn on my heel and duck behind something. I'm not even kidding. That is literally what I will do. I'm not friends with them on Facebook. We do not talk. We do not interact in any way, shape, or form. And actually, it was only this year that I started having dreams about high school that weren't nightmares. And by nightmares, I don't mean a clown running around the halls chasing you with a knife. I don't mean you dream that you show up to school and forgot to put on pants, or you didn't do your homework or anything like that. I mean that just dreaming that I was back at that school was enough for it to be a nightmare for me to wake up anxious and upset, and to feel anxious and upset in my dream and absolutely positively miserable. All it took was for me to dream that I had to go to school there every day again. That in and of itself was enough for it to be a nightmare for me. That was my high school experience. Not because anything particularly traumatic happened, but like I said, if you don't fit in, you're pretty much SOL, because there are so few people, and I didn't like the things other people liked. I wasn't into the sports other people liked. I didn't go to the same church that the other people did. So, like I said, kind of SOL. And I was the only one who really had the political, legal mind there. So I was just kind of alone. And I spent a lot of time alone, actually, sitting literally by myself in class or at lunch. And so I'm through that now, but that was a very difficult time. And that is something that I don't know if that would necessarily have happened had I been in a public school. I don't know if that's because of a private school, because it's a religious school, or just because I'm weird. I don't know. But that was my experience. College, though, is a completely other thing. I actually have some really good friends from there, and it was a really great experience. Definitely would do it again. So there you have my take on the pros and cons of religious education. This is Firewalker asking you, what do you think? Is religious education worth the cons to have the pros? Let me know down below. And of course, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, share as well. And as always, you can see my sources and video links in the description. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you guys next time when I discuss the no true Christian fallacy, as I'm calling it. That should be very interesting. It's going to be a fun project, and I look forward to seeing you guys there.